Pharmacy Times. Everything pharmacy, every day.
Josh Bolin, serve as Senior Advisor at the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, as well as Senior Vice President for Pulse by NABP.
I'm John Kirtley. I'm the Executive Director of the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy.
So, Pulse by NABP is a digital platform that the association developed to help our member boards of pharmacy as they work to protect public health and patient safety. The best way to think about Pulse is that it is a directory for all the trading partners in the supply chain, so manufacturers, wholesalers, and pharmacies, as well as a directory for all the products that move through the supply chain. So those two directories taken together enable our members, when they're out in the field, to scan the 2D data matrix of a product and to ask questions about that product. So understanding whether the identifiers on that product were affixed by the manufacturer, or trying to understand who has bought or sold that product previously. And so we built this to help with the implementation of the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, or the DSCSA. And we've been, working on this for a number of years now, and ultimately launched the first features of the platform at the beginning of 2025.
Yeah, I think for me, Pulse is a tool that we've needed for a long time, not only in the investigative space, but just for me as a pharmacist, that I can literally take my phone and scan a product if I have any reason to suspect that it might not be valid or something might have happened with the provenance of that product, and it can either immediately tell me that it's good or there's a potential problem and get me in touch with the right people to talk to about any potential problems. Absolutely. For the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy, as soon as we heard that Pulse was potentially going to be a tool we could use, we were interested. We were ready to do beta testing or whatever we could to have it as a tool kind of at our disposal. In the real world, we did have notification that there was a potentially suspect product. It was an injectable GLP-1 that had occurred in another state with a related issue here in our state. It was in a pharmacy about an hour from our office. We immediately dispatched one of our inspector investigators, who's a pharmacist by training, to go to that store. And as soon as we scanned that product, we realized we were in kind of a beta test mode at that time because it was early development. But by putting it into production and scanning that product, it was immediately identified as a suspect product that would be quarantined. For us, the very next day, we had email and phone contact with the appropriate people with that drug manufacturer and figured out that it was not a legitimate product. Let me just say, having been here a little over 20 years, I have faced multiple instances where we would identify medications that we thought had been diverted out of the normal chain of distribution, that potentially either ended up in a pharmacy that we weren't sure if something was legitimate when it came in from a gray market wholesaler, or working with other law enforcement entities, with our Arkansas State Police, with the DEA, on issues where we would see stock bottles of medications and we could get down to lot number and expiration. Sometimes we would get lucky enough that there would be a pharmacy sticker from receipt of a medication that could help us, especially in the law enforcement side of these cases. But it was a very onerous process, and it was very difficult to establish where drugs might have left the legal chain of distribution, out in the street, out in the illegitimate chain. With this tool, when I'm either working a case with DEA or with local law enforcement, if we come across a actual manufacturer's bottle that I can take this tool and scan it, we can tell through the provenance of that product that yes, it was a legitimate product manufactured by this company, distributed through here, and we can get all the way to the point of, well, it came out of this store. We know that store had an armed robbery or a break-in overnight, and it actually connects the criminals to the case that we had an unknown loss of drugs, or unknown where the drugs had gone. For us, I have spent weeks in the past trying to figure out where a drug had come from, or maybe where it had exited the legitimate chain of distribution, with no success at all. And the real difficult thing for us is there are so many people that are potentially in this equation. It's really hard to align who we would reach out to specifically from a board of pharmacy perspective, because the legal distribution side of a manufacturer we're dealing with or a wholesaler is not necessarily the exact same line of people that we need to speak with when there's been a diversion of some sort that happened down the chain somewhere.
Sure. So the very tools that, John has been talking about by being able to utilize product verification to, make a quick determination about the legitimacy of a product and that product's identifiers, that is a tool that's actually contemplated under the law. And pharmacies have an obligation to perform product verifications if they identify something that might be suspect or illegitimate. And so because, what we've seen, in the case of Arkansas and other states, there are still suspect products that are making their way into our legitimate supply chain. And very often it is the independent pharmacies and the community pharmacies that are targeted with those deals that are too good to be true. So one of the things that NABP has committed to do is to actually make that product verification tool available at no cost for pharmacies. And the reason we want to do that is that DSCSA and the law only works if all the participants in the supply chain are utilizing the tools that DSCSA provides. So when we're looking ahead to November of this year, when the next kind of compliance milestone for pharmacies is going into effect, when they should in theory be fully complying with the DSCSA. Our intention is to make that tool available to pharmacies later this summer, so that way they have time to work that into their existing processes, and start utilizing and getting familiar with the tool. And the hope is that it's something that they don't have to use that often, because they're only purchasing from authorized trading partners that they vetted. But it is a tool that we believe they should have access to, which is why we're making that available to them at no cost.
Would add on to that. When I've personally been in pharmacies and have shown them how we have this tool, or when our inspectors, investigators have, the pharmacists see the value in this tool as well. And the question is usually, how can I get that? And I'm basically having to tell them it's not how, it's when. It's in development, but the pharmacists want this tool, because knowing that every once in a while you have something that just doesn't seem right about a medication, or you've got a tote of meds that come in and something looks to have been damaged or anything, just knowing that you could scan that product to validate it immediately in the palm of your hand is an incredibly valuable tool.
One of the things that the DSCSA did, that can seem kind of technical and scary, but is actually a mechanism to really unlock more value throughout the supply chain, is the fact that they're now serializing products down to the saleable unit. And that's not something that existed before. John mentioned, before a regulator or even a pharmacy could only get to that lot level in terms of being able to trace a product. Now, because you have that unique serial number that is with the product as it moves through the supply chain, that really unlocks a lot of potential, and should frankly give pharmacies, wholesalers, and manufacturers more confidence that the products are only going where they should be. From a patient perspective, everybody's, kind of familiar with the barcodes that are on products today. And so they may not know that that additional layer of protection is there. But it does really strengthen the supply chain and opens up other opportunities for supply chain visibility. Potentially there's a future where down the road, maybe patients could even scan a barcode to understand, whether the product that they've obtained is coming from that legitimate source. I think we're a little ways off from that, but that is possible because you have serialization and you have the GS1 global standards that are being implemented. And so I think it's very promising. And DSCSA really should get the credit for putting that in place and opening up those opportunities in the future.
Yeah, and on that, I would just echo exactly what Josh has said. With serialization, it raises the bar tremendously for anyone that is trying to introduce counterfeit drugs into the market, because it's a different level. I mean, Back in the day, we would say, well, it's got a hologram on it, and only a few people had the ability to make a hologram, or it's got specific type of font on it, or anything else. And in the past, we have seen examples where fake drugs looked better than real drugs. Like maybe the tablet actually looked like it was just slightly, just a little bit clearer pressing, or the packaging looked like it had a higher quality sticker on it because it hadn't roamed around or been handled as much. And this goes and takes us from the appearance of it might be good enough to does it have a valid serial number that actually links up to where it should be. So it is an incredible tool for patient safety all the way to the counter.
Great question. And I think, one of the interesting roles that I think NABP has fallen into is the fact that, you know, as DSCSA is being implemented, and it was a law that was, enacted in 2013, and here we are in 2026. Um, I think the way that the law was structured really put a lot on industry to kind of solve how things were going to be governed and how things were going to go forward. And the agency, the FDA, sometimes is very limited in terms of how they can engage. So it was left to a lot of industry discussion, and industry deserves a tremendous amount of credit for the progress that was made. Um, but one of the things that was likely lacking throughout that process was sort of a neutral entity that represented the state regulators. So the states really weren't part of the equation, even though the states are the ones that are responsible and out in the field for, driving compliance with DSCSA. So I think we were able to step in and kind of coming at that from the state perspective, those who are actually, doing the work out in the field. I think that lent NABP some credibility in terms of we're coming at this from the same perspective that the law is trying to achieve, which is patient safety. And so I think that patient safety angle allowed us to kind of step in and be a neutral party that could bring regulated entities together to try to help solve this common goal.
I would just add from a state board of pharmacy perspective and a pharmacist perspective, NABP has long been seen as a trusted leader in our profession. It's my professional membership organization as a board of pharmacy, but it's also the organization that has for many years maintained our national licensure exam for all pharmacists. So by them being the neutral party in between, they've really helped to bring both sides of this equation together to connect pharmacists and pharmacy boards, regulators directly to the manufacturers, where we are in the same boat, going the same direction, working together, rather than trying to at some point figure out who to reach out to or what connection could be made.
Pharmacy Times. Everything pharmacy, every day.